Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. I know we've got lots of clients, hopefully potential clients. Some of our competitors have joined. Hello to our competitors who joined. And we are excited to talk to y'all today. Let's first say, who do we have here? Let's see if this will load. That's strange, but is that only loading Calvin? It's just Calvin. Nell and I are leaving.
Bye.
I don't know why our photos aren't coming up, which is too bad because I look absolutely incredible in mine. So just imagine it. But I'm James. I started this company 10 years ago. Oh, there I am. See, I didn't lie. I look amazing. So yeah, I started the company 10 years ago. Happy to be here. I'm joined by Nell, who is our Director of Strategic Sales, who has been with us how long now?
6.5 wonderful years together.
6.5
Hello, everyone.
Wonderful years without any pain, no bad days, only good. And Calvin,
My good vibes.
Who's also Director of Strategic Sales, who's been with us not quite as long. How long, Calvin?
It's been a year.
In a year.
And I'll just make a really quick joke that it makes sense that my photo was very dramatically on the screen by itself, because I was just saying to Nell, I've got this Broadway poster behind me, so the drama is just all around. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're zooming in.
Awesome.
Okay.
Let's get into it. So we've had an amazing response for this webinar. Thank you all so much for joining. And really, comes as no surprise. This is a conversation that in every conversation we have, I feel like it's really picked up steam in the last 3 to 6 months. So excited to dig into it together. So why are we here? First of all, there is more pressure than ever to make our marketing dollars work harder and prove it. And we'll get into a few reasons of why that is. I'm on our strategic sales team here at Fohr, so it's really my job to understand what our clients' goals are, what we need to accomplish with our influencer marketing campaigns, and also understand what you all are up against internally to really unlock those influencer budgets. And then on the other side, prove that they're working. So maybe you've been hearing things like, we need to put $1 in and get 2 out. How can we be sure that our dollars are working hard for us with influencers? Or a favorite of ours, our campaign goal is brand awareness, producing quality IGC, oh yeah, and conversions and sales too. Just a few goals there. And lastly, everyone's favorite acronym, ROAS, ROAS, ROAS. So we hear you. Or as these brilliant minds put it, we here for you. We are really seeing this renewed focus on bottom of the funnel conversion and performance being really the key kind of metric that a lot of our clients are looking at and feeling pressure to deliver on. Essentially an ask to kind of measure success in our influencer world in the same way that you would a paid Facebook ad. So what we'll talk a little bit about today is that by over-indexing and kind of really overemphasizing ROAS as a core measure of success, we're forgetting a lot of the other contributing factors here, and we're being sort of led down a false path. So kind of missing out on that larger picture. So we'll get into some of the reasons why that's happening. But first, let's take a step back to our marketing jargon and acronyms 101, ROI. Who is she? So simple enough, ROI, or return on investment, is calculated by dividing the profit earned on an investment, or in this case, our sales, by the cost of that investment. So this equation is, pretty straightforward, and definitely straightforward enough for more kind of traditional digital channels like display and ad. But what does this actually mean for influencer marketing? So we know that typically influencer marketing sits at the top of the funnel and is really kind of that jumping off point in the consumer's journey. It starts with getting people to actually view that ad or that sponsored content, and importantly, holding their attention. And ultimately, we're trying to get them to click and to kind of continue down that purchase funnel. But if we zoom in a step further here and actually look at what this path looks like, I'll give a personal example here. So I think about my own user behavior. So for example, I see an Instagram story from my coworker, Sophie, who posts about this new Dr. Jart moisturizer she's loving and is obsessed with. I have seen this story. So naturally, I'm clicking through, I'm landing on the Sephora website, but now I'm in the wild world of the Sephora website with a lot of different products to look at, a million different reviews to kind of compare against. And all of a sudden, my B train is here. I close out of the app. I'm distracted. Until a couple of days later, maybe I see another skincare girly that I follow who is posting about the exact same Dr. Jart moisturizer. And I'm now kind of pulled back in and my interest is re-engaged. Maybe I'm saving that post, I'm bookmarking it. And finally, maybe I feel like, okay, I've done enough research. Here's my $50 Sephora, add to cart, voila, it's a sale. The question though here is, would that sale actually be attributed to Sophie's Instagram story way over to the left there, or even that second influencer's post? Likely not. It's probably going to end up being attributed to that kind of last touch point there, what you can see as that paid ad.
I think that so many of us in influencer marketing, like we understand that we live in this world where it is like, I know this stuff works. I can't prove the full weight of how much it works. And we totally understand that due to a more kind of complex and difficult economic situation than we have been in, that there is more of a focus on conversion. We're going to talk through some of the reasons a bit later, but we totally understand that desire and the need to drive sales. But there are also downsides and there are risks to over-indexing on the focus of conversion. As we kind of look at our customers generally, right? We have at the bottom of this kind of inverted pyramid, we've got existing customers all the way up to future customers, right? And so we go from more likely to buy, less likely to buy. This bottom to the immediate prospects, existing customers, advertising to them is the most expensive. Think, AdWords, retargeting. This is the most expensive ads to buy. The kind of top of the funnel prospecting is less expensive, but again, harder to get ROI from those things. As we think about CAC, and I don't, those of you who are on growth teams are living and breathing by CAC, the cost to acquire a customer. Often, one of the kind of foundational equations of growth marketing teams is CAC versus LTV. So CAC, your cost to acquire a customer versus your lifetime value of that customer. And we see this a lot, where if you are too focused on conversion and paid and bottom of the funnel advertising, that you start to advertise, you start getting better and better at it. So your cost per acquisition goes way down, right? And you start getting great ROI and you are going out and you're converting sales and you are kind of picking off all of that low-hanging fruit and it feels incredible and you're making money and life is really good. But the problem is, if you are only focused on that bottom of the funnel, if you are only focused on the people who are, again, to go back here, either immediate prospects or existing customers, then eventually, that CAC starts to creep up. It gets unsustainable. And again, because you have been so focused on the bottom side of this equation, you're missing out on that bigger opportunity. As you think about that, again, we all understand this to be true, right? Existing demand is infinitesimally small when compared to the potential customers that we could sell to. And with every brand having a renewed and focus on conversion and on bottom of the funnel, there is even more competition for this existing demand. If you think in beauty and people who are searching for a long wear foundation, it is getting more and more expensive to find those people. And again, with more and more people focusing on bottom of the funnel, more dollars going to bottom of the funnel, it becomes more expensive. Google Ads increased in price 35% last year. I think they're expected to increase another 40% this year. So this advertising is getting significantly more expensive. And I don't know why I have wanted to use a fishing analogy all week. Nell and Calvin, I think, have been rolling their eyes as I'm like, yeah, what about my fishing analogy? But I own this company, so I get to use it. And one way to think about it is, if for some reason you are into fishing, which I'm not, so I don't know why I was drawn to this analogy, but let's say you are, you're going fishing every weekend, and you're not catching much, and you want to increase the amount of fish that you're catching, and you go and you buy a new pole, and you watch YouTubes on how to cast better, and you buy a radar. You're doing all these things to try and figure out, how can I catch more fish out of this pond? What we're saying is that also that is super important, but in this incredible drawing, there could be another pond up the hill a little bit that just has a lot more fish in it. And you might be fishing in the wrong pond, and limiting your aperture to that super focus on conversion, it leaves you at this kind of, bottom of this hill, fishing in ponds that have been picked over and don't have as much opportunity in them. So that is a risk of that over-indexing there. So we're going to break this down today into a few different parts. First, we're going to talk about those external factors that are impacting ROI and measurement. Then we're going to talk about what you can do tactically to increase your ROI, to increase the value and the return that you have on these campaigns. And then we're going to show some of the future of what we believe conversion tracking is going to look like, and show you some new product that we have coming out as well. So let's jump into it. No big surprise here. Y'all are marketers. You're very smart. I don't need to harp on the fact that, the new Apple rules have decimated the ability for performance marketing to be effective. So this has really hurt the entire industry. It's going to continue to get worse. We've got cookies were supposed to be deprecated this year. I think they moved it a year, but tracking on the internet is going away. And so again, a lot of the kind of bottom of the funnel things that have worked so well are not going to work in the near future. Another thing that has been interesting, and this is also something I think I had been wrong about at times, is that we were a bit wrong, or at least the timing has been wrong on how people want to shop. I'm sure y'all have seen this, right? That Instagram shut down their affiliate program. We were partnering with them to help launch that, but they walked away from it. They removed the shopping tab. TikTok has pulled back from their Shopify partnership. They have pulled back from the live streaming products that they had. And all of this is saying that US consumers, at least, are not super interested in shopping where they're being entertained. These are entertainment platforms. This is something to get away from the world. This is something you're doing between meetings. This is something you do while your fiance goes to the bathroom, when you're at the restaurant, whatever it is. This is something that you're doing to be entertained. It's not surprising that this is not a place that people want to shop. And I think we all had this dream that consumers were going to change their behavior significantly, and they were going to start shopping in these platforms, and that was going to create a much easier way for us to get attribution about the sales that influencers were driving. But TikTok, Instagram, they all have enough data to say, this is not happening at the scale or the speed that they would like. And it has to make us rethink, again, how we think about how we're going to prove that this is working, how we're going to prove that the sales, we've made the sales if the content or the ads are being consumed in a platform that is like a walled garden that we can't track. And it's a place that consumers don't want to shop. And then obviously our attribution models aren't telling this whole story. We all know this, right? We know that last click attribution does not tell the whole story. It is incredibly dangerous as marketers that we have let the platforms that we are buying advertising from be the ones to tell us how much sales were driven from those platforms. You know, if you happen to like take a breath near a Facebook ad, they would tell you that that ad was 100% them. And that's the problem with the current attribution models, is that, you know, they're only looking at that last click, and that last click gets 100% of the sale. And ultimately that is not, that's not the full story. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
So I'll jump in and start talking about ways that we can provide that impact. And one thing that we're all aware of, but ironically sometimes forget, is that our attention is a finite resource. But even when we think about that, we are essentially in an attention economy. And we're not at a loss at all for information. And even when we're looking at how volatile the overall economy is, consumers are only spending more time on their devices. And it's the way that the world is shifting. So we have to continue to adapt in ways that help us connect with consumers. So that brings us to the now infamous ad blockers. It would make sense that ad blockers have jumped up in popularity over the last decade, and this won't die down in the near future, which is how we can begin to transition more into the role that influencers play in driving value for your brand. So if we zoom out, influencers help enter rather than interrupt the conversation. And a big part of what they've done is build communities that they talk with. So we'll dig more into this, but it's that type of relationship that helps create more of a bond between a brand and prospective consumers. So let's bring back our trusty ROI equation that Nell introduced. As a quick reminder, we're looking at this by dividing the profit earned on an investment by the cost of that investment. And as we move further down the purchase funnel, one reality is that we begin to see a decrease in control we have over what a consumer does or doesn't do. So I've already mentioned that we're in this attention economy, and it's good to understand how powerful being able to grab and sustain someone's attention is. So that's why we want to call out some things that we can all essentially control while thinking about ROI. And some of those things are initial audience touch points like views, clicks, and other metrics that take a look at a consumer's purchase intent. So if we keep this in mind, the first thing I'll talk about is influencer selection. And one of the reasons why people are hating traditional advertising so much right now is because many ads are essentially irrelevant to them. And we talk about relevance a lot, and it's really important when you think about influencer selection. So you want to find influencers that make sense for your brand. And I know that that might sound like that's the first thing you would do, but it doesn't always happen. And it's good to take the time to dig into an influencer's audience to get a sense of why people are following them. And a good way of thinking about things is to run this through the lens of celebrity partners. So you don't want to pick someone just because they're famous or because they're having a moment. Their cultural relevance might be at an all-time high, but it can still easily diminish for your brand if it's not the right fit. So while we've got this slide up, I'll briefly reiterate one of our philosophies here at Fohr, which is to think about the invisible influence someone might have. And this goes beyond the engagement rate, because we all know by now on the call that the engagement rate is not the end all be all when determining how successful someone can be. So I'll talk about one way of looking at invisible influence, which is through reach. So when we think about reach, what we look for is the quality of an influencer's reach. And I'm no mathematician, but in the next couple of slides, we've got some examples that I'll quickly run through that really, it shows what I mean. So if we think about a campaign that has 5 influencers, they all have 100,000 followers and they each cost $10,000. Let's say they've got 50% reach. You can expect to reach about 75,000 people, and you're going to have $133 for your CPM. If we take a look at a slightly different example, a lot of the moving pieces here are still the same. So you've got the same amount of influencers, the same amount of followers, the same cost for this campaign. But the big difference is now you've only chosen to work with individuals that have 65% reach or more. And that's really going to help you reach more people. And when we look at the results, it really does lower your overall CPM per influencer. So I know that that is honestly a simplified example, but when you think about things like this, influencer selection and reach, you're going to begin seeing how you can still drive value.
Yeah, and that's great, Calvin. I think like what we're kind of saying here in the nuance is that there is a, you know, it's kind of like more satisfying to look at this, and as we think about ROI, just be like, I need to optimize sales. Like, how do I do it? And I think what we're trying to say is that, like, again, to Nell's point, we don't always have control over, you know, if we can get someone to purchase. And let's be real, most people are not walking around in their lives just like ready to buy shit. You know, like, you aren't often in the mindset of being ready to purchase something. And so much of what we need to do is to make that purchase possible. You know, marketing, so much of marketing's job is like creating an opportunity to sell someone something, right? But again, like, we've all had the experience of like wanting to buy something, walking into the store, and you know, the line is down the block, or the new like obnoxious thing that they're still doing post COVID, that like every store in Soho has a line out front because they think it makes them like supreme or something. And so they like let like 3 people into Celine at a time or something, and you have to stand on the street for 15 minutes. And so you might like be ready to buy something, right? But then for some reason you don't, right? So like, so we think about control. What can we control, right? And that's what we're saying, like those views and clicks, like those are things that we can have more of an impact on. And it is wild how much different even selecting people with higher reach can be in that equation. Because as Calvin said, not only is those CPMs lower, but we're talking in this case about 75,000 people entering the top of your funnel, or 325,000 people entering the top of your funnel for the same exact cost, because influencers charge by follower count, not by reach currently. That might change. And thus, optimizing for reach is an amazing way to optimize that spend and set yourself up to potentially make more sales. Something else this year is we do think that influencer costs are going to level out. You know, ultimately, this industry is a market, and no player is big enough to be a market maker. And so it is largely driven by supply and demand. And so if you look at the last few years, there has been, you know, huge increases in influencer costs, and for a number of reasons. Again, we think that you know, prices are going to kind of level out this year, just as supply starts to, or demand starts to, if not dip. I think demand could be flat this year. And even with demand being flat, there are new influencers every single day. These platforms are growing every day. And so our supply of influencers increases dramatically. So while Google ads and Facebook are getting 30 or 40% more expensive this year, we expect that influencer prices are again going to level out a little bit. And there's some interesting things we can also do here to incentivize and to think about our costs in a different way. Again, we believe, and a big part of our brand ethos is that influencers should be paid fairly. We do not, you know, send out offers that we believe are below market. I think that ultimately, to be a good brand partner, you don't want to be doing that. And you know, tools such as "fuck you, pay me" are out there. And again, you don't want to be getting a reputation as a brand of underpaying people. But there are, I think, levers to pull, and there are ways that the industry is changing. We're starting to explore, you know, creating bonuses for extraordinary reach and performance. And so holding aside 5 or 10% of the total campaign budget to offer as bonuses if influencers get double their amount of reach or something, right? And so how do we let influencers, you know, benefit from, you know, if a post goes viral, while allowing brands to, you know, offset some of the costs in the initial pay. So there's some like things changing in the way that we're thinking about that.
Hey, James, just to quickly
Yes.
jump in here, we're getting a few questions in the chat about reach, kind of the definition of that for us and what we do to measure it, and how people can measure it.
Yeah.
So maybe just talk a bit about that.
Great. So reach, we're pulling in from the APIs. So that is, you know, the average amount of people that you are reaching. And these numbers are, you know, these numbers are meant to be representative. 65% reach, average reach is incredibly high. 15, 20% on Instagram is average. That means that someone with 100,000 followers on average is reaching 15 to 20,000 of those people. If you look at their last 30 posts, that's the way we calculate it. Their last 30 posts, what's the average? Now, TikTok, that number is much lower. And something we look at it with TikTok is not just the average reach, but what is the kind of like virality coefficient? Like how much is the reach being driven by a few posts that perform really well versus consistency? And something I think as you're thinking about sponsored posts, you know, if on TikTok someone, you know, has 100,000 followers and, you know, you look at their average reach and it's 20,000, you think, okay, that's not bad. But then you dive in and 90% of their videos get 1,000 views and a few of them get millions. You know, you might be a little more weary of working with that person on a sponsored post, because if you pay for expected 20,000 eyeballs and you get 1,000, you're going to feel, you know, you're not going to feel like that's super fair. So especially on TikTok, we are looking at, you know, how much virality is impacting reach, and considering that when we're selecting influencers. Does that? So yeah, so reach and reach, views, impressions, they're all like, generally reach is the unique number of people that you've reached, and the impressions or views is how many times something got viewed. So if you know, if 10 people saw a video but 5 of them watched it twice, you get 10. Your reach is 10. Your impressions or views are 15. All that to say, again, like certainly asking partners to give you reach numbers is completely justifiable. And certainly if, you know, you're talking about much larger contracts with macro influencers, you definitely want to check in on those reach numbers, because, you know, sometimes the difference can be one person has 5% reach and one has 50% reach. And again, if you think about that, 5% reach person has to do 10 posts to reach the amount of people that the person with 50% reach has. And so it is probably like the number one simplest way to create more efficiency in the ad dollars that you spend. Now, caveat to Calvin's point, we have to make sure that's the right audience. You know, that sometimes the accounts with like the highest reach are like meme accounts. Well, meme accounts have no commercial value, really. They can't sell something. And so even though, you know, a meme account might have 75% reach, it has an audience, but it doesn't have any influence. And that's like the like art and science of this world, right? Is that like we have to look at the data and we have to look at the numbers, and like, you know, these things are important. These are screenshots from our platform, and you know, we're looking at all these numbers and we're checking the demographics and the reach numbers and the impressions and the virality coefficients and the demographics and all of these things. But we also, to Calvin's point, ask ourselves, why do people follow this person? Do they have a relationship with their audience, or, you know, are they just, you know, throwing things out there? Does that audience feel like they know that person? Do they listen to them? Do they have influence over them? Or Are they just kind of entertaining them? Those things have different values. Audience and influence you pay much different for those things. So hopefully that makes sense. If there's any more questions on that, throw it in Q&A. We're almost done with our side of things, and then we will, I think, have plenty of time for questions, which I'm sure there will be a few. Well, I just looked at the chat here, and there's a question about what's the best way to negotiate fees based on reach. Again, I think that if reach is extraordinarily low, below the benchmarks, and we can send along those benchmarks when we send this deck, then I think that that's something to mention and say, hey, like average reach for your follower count is 20%, you're at 10%. Maybe you want to put more posts in, maybe you want to lower the rate. It's not to say the influencer will do that. Ultimately, again, this is a market, it's a transaction between two parties. People's rates are not just based on their reach. Sometimes it's what do they do, what's their production value, how in demand are they, are they influential in some other way. It's always more expensive to work with somebody that's an influencer, and they're a chef at a hot new restaurant. So there are other things that impact costs, and of course other reasons that we work with influencers, but below average reach is something that I would mention in my negotiations if it's something that feels out of the norm for you. Feel free to throw more questions in there. So where are we going here? As I said, last click attribution just doesn't make a lot of sense for influencer marketing. One, we can't even pass tracking really between these social platforms and the web. Also, of the dollars that we spend, probably 90% of the ad dollars for influencers that the sponsored posts spend, it goes in support of media types that don't even have a link. Like, it's not even possible to link, right? And so we already know that 80-90% of what we're putting out there will be impossible to track in some way, right? And so where things are moving is multi-touch attribution. I'm sure some of you have heard of this, some of you maybe haven't, but to very simply explain it, again, what has been done in the past is it's last click attribution. So if in this case, if you found, and this is real data, I think from Fohr. So if you first found us on an organic search, and then you visited us from a social network, and then our referral was email, so then you clicked on an email, and then you clicked on a link from another social network, right? In that case, and you made the conversion at the end, social network gets 100% of it. What multi-touch is saying is, let's look at all of the touch points and let's try and weigh them and tell a more complete picture about what is actually happening here. How can I tell which of these 5 touch points, to go back to Nell's example where she had the kind of zigzagging and the incredible Dr. Jart moisturizer. We love you, Dr. Jart. In that case, which of those touch points impacted the sale? Probably all of them. How do we weight that? And how do we give it percentages? And now say, oh, I think it's actually maybe 50% that last click, but I want to give some of the credit to email, and I also need to give some of the credit to organic search. And so basically that is what multi-touch attribution works to do. And how it's different from affiliate, again, is that it is looking at kind of larger trends and trying to look at all of the advertising activities that a brand might be doing and weigh them in some way. Now, we are building we're testing this with a few clients right now. We're releasing a pixel. Our VP of product was going to come on here and explain it in all of his wonderful technical wizardry, but could not make it today. He has some exciting life changes happening. So you're stuck with me. But we are super excited about this. And how these tracking pixels work is you put a piece of code on your site, and it's going to start to look at not just, the way if affiliate works is I click a link, and if a purchase happens after I click that link, I'm going to track it. What this pixel is doing is tracking all of your sales, all of your traffic. Ambassadors and influencers can also get specific links, but the depth of tracking that you're getting is deeper. You're not just getting sales, you're getting how many people added stuff to cart, how many page views, what was their path, like what pages did they actually look at? Also, what is increasingly important, and I think for marketers, what we need to start to do is look at the trends of unattributable revenue and what's happening in your advertising. And so if, let's say, you have a week where you had a few posts go viral on TikTok, and the next week you see sales are up 15%, what multi-touch attribution seeks to do is try and look at the trends of how your site and your business work, understand the kind of broader scope of the advertising efforts that you are currently participating in, and say, okay, all things being equal, we kind of understand what should be happening with performance. Now we have a 15% overperformance in this week. The only thing we can point that to is that we had, 5 million views on TikTok last week. And so while we don't have a direct attribution there, we're going to be able to attribute that and say, okay, we believe that, those views had a say in this. Another part of it obviously is tracking all of those touch points and starting to give percentage values to each step along the way, rather than, again, just looking at last touch. So this tracking pixel is, again, is something that we're starting to roll out. It is, again, going to look at not just your site traffic and sales, individual, traffic, sales, add to carts, et cetera, that ambassadors are responsible for, but it will also look at the data from your own social accounts. So, looking at the total reach of your, your Instagram, your own TikTok, to understand what's happening in your own social, and then also, what is happening in social more generally. Did you have a big week on Instagram? Did you have a big week on TikTok? How can we take all of these data streams together and create a more clear attribution picture for you? Because again, we need to be making decisions off of this data. It's incredibly important. We need to understand what is and is not working. There's the famous quote, I know 50% of my advertising doesn't work. I just don't know which 50%. And we certainly, again, want to be able to help guide and help marketers make better decisions. I think multi-touch attribution is, if it's not something you're talking about a lot, I think it is something that is going to dominate the conversations here in the coming years. So we got through a decent amount pretty quickly. I'm sure there are some questions. So I'm going to just fire up the Q&A here and see what we got. You said TikTok's organic reach is lower compared to Instagram. Is that something you've noticed? Is there a source you can credit? That's from our own data. So looking at our own data from the 180,000 influencers that we have on the platform, and seeing that, yes, TikTok's reach numbers are generally lower. And that makes sense. TikTok's focus right now is, and this is something that's potentially is definitely something to watch. It's something we're keeping an eye on, is that TikTok is trying to get people to follow algorithms, not people, right? That like the individual people you follow on TikTok is not as important as, you know, what is in your For You page. And that makes it really exciting and interesting and addictive for users. It makes it very hard for influencers, you know, because if you can't keep feeding into that algorithm, they are even less likely than Instagram to show your content to the people who follow you. And the concern is, since Meta has been, you know, taking their cues from TikTok on how to build, is that Meta will do that too. And that it'll get even harder for influencers on Instagram to reach their audience. Look, we saw this happen already. There was huge blowback, and they ended up changing it. We had those few weeks where they were putting a lot more content from accounts that you don't follow into your feed. And they're still doing it a bit. Like, I don't know why I'm getting like 15 golden retriever videos a day. I don't know why I don't have a golden retriever. I'm not overly interested in golden retrievers. I don't know specifically how I got into Instagram's golden retriever algorithm, but like, here I am. So that is a concern. And I think why it's concerning for influencers is if reach numbers fall to 5% across the board, it's going to get harder for brands to, you know, use follower count to pay influencers. And I think the shift would be to a more performance-based model as far as views go. Again, that's why we're thinking about bonuses, performance bonuses for influencers as a kind of first step towards a new way to structure payments. Is that if 5% is going to be the average reach, we need a way to pay a little bit less for the initial post, but make sure that if the influencer overperforms, that they get to, again, benefit from that and get some compensation. Why do brands expect solely to get sales from one post from an influencer? That is a great question. If you can answer that question, I will let you jump on video and you can do the webinar, because I don't know why oftentimes we talk a lot internally about this phrase. We say the specific is universal, right? And we try and like think about our own behavior sometimes and apply that elsewhere. And so if we're in a client meeting and they're like, yeah, but like I need to get 5x ROAS on this, so return on ad spend on this post, I'll ask like, okay, when was the last time you swiped up on an influencer's post and purchased something from it? And they'll be like, well, I've never done that. And it's like, okay, how many of your recent purchases are influenced by what you see on social? All of them. Again, that's the like purgatory we live in as professionals in this space, is that like we understand the impact we're having is outsized from our ability to track it. Which is why, again, we think about what can we control. But what's not changing is that like there is no path to building a brand over the next 10 years without influencer marketing. No path. This is going to be the dominant form of brand communication in the world. All you just Super Bowl ads a couple of weeks ago to know that like advertising, as we have understood it for 50 years, is in a death spiral. It's not working. It's not interesting. And ultimately it is going to be replaced by influencer marketing, because advertising follows attention. We're purchasing attention. And the ad dollars are going to follow where the eyeballs are. And ask yourself, in 5 years, do I think people will spend more or less time on social media? I can't see a situation where they spend less. And so this is absolutely going to continue to be dominant. Is there a timeline for rollout of the Pixel? It is being tested live with a few partners right now. Because our VP of product is not here and he can't correct me, I will say it will be live in the next 3 months, and we are incredibly excited for people to start using it. We talked about how we're calculating reach percentage. Let's see, we've got, what are your recommendations to talent managers who are trying to prove creators' worth if we have less ways to prove ROI to brands? Yeah, Kai, that's a, again, this is, you know, so much of what we do is also have these same conversations. And I hope today that we've given you some tools to have those conversations more effectively. I think the core of it is, though, that like this stuff, it does work. This is where people are coming. This is, social media is the like most unbelievable discovery engine that has ever been created. It is staggering, you know, and we all know that this is what is driving consumers' behavior. This is where they're finding out about new products. This is where they're planning their vacations. This is where they're finding new restaurants, right? We know that to be true. And yes, the attribution models are not kind to us. We get screwed. Honestly, like we get completely screwed. I think if there was some way to snap a finger and every single dollar that influencer marketing drove was attributable, I think the industry would be 5 to 10 times the size minimum. And I think most brands would 5 to 10x their spend overnight. And if I was starting a brand today, you know, it's essentially, it would be, you know, 85% of my budget probably. Now I'm biased, obviously, but like that is the level I believe this stuff works. And there is enormous opportunity for brands that also believe that. And I think most of our clients do, like, even though they also live in that performance purgatory of like not knowing the depth of the impact that we're having, they know that, again, there is no way to build a brand without this. And not to get too like, you know, too in the future, but like, I would say in 10 to 15 years, we may not even have websites. And so every single like thing we know about how people purchase things and about how commerce works is changing right now. And influencers is going to continue to be a huge part of that. Okay. Influencers have been inflating their costs to collab as of late, and some of their prices are getting ridiculous. How can we lower the price of these contracts? Influencer pricing has gotten expensive. Now, what is complex about this question is that, again, there are so many factors that go into it. One of it being supply and demand. And some influencers, you know, if they say, okay, I do 30 posts a month, I'm willing to have 30% of my feed sponsored, that 10 posts a month are sponsored. I have 5 long-term partners. That means 5 ad spots a month that are new. And I get 50 requests a month to fill the 5 spots. Well, you can make up any price you want, honestly. Like the demand in that case is so high that they have complete pricing control over what they do. I think it is important as a marketer to understand your price and to understand what you can pay, and to be respectful. If an influencer price comes in high and you try and negotiate it, you know, we'll say, look, I understand that that's your price, and you know, I don't want to disrespect you. Ultimately, we can't support that. Like we can't. It doesn't work for like our goals, and we hope to work with you in the future, and that's fine. You know, I mean, there's millions, maybe tens of millions of influencers now. These platforms are so large, it is difficult for our feeble human brains to understand it. There are over 1 billion people on each platform, right? I don't know if you've heard this stat, but if like you looked at 10,000 accounts a day, every day, it would take you like 121 years to see 1 billion of them. 10,000 a day, every day, over 100 years. So the platforms are so much bigger than we even understand. And so I'd say if you're not finding influencers whose costs fit into an equation that you can make sense, then keep digging a little bit more. But again, I think I would encourage everyone to be respectful of those partners, and know that some of it is driven by an outsized demand, and ultimately their pricing has separated from data and is more now about how many people want to work with them versus how many they're willing to work with. Okay. Have you been able to sell creators on the bonuses? Emma, yeah, it's something we have started to test. It is going to be harder with influencers that are super established, again, and who have agents. Right now, we are thinking about it less as a way to lower the cost and more as an incentive for performance, right? Like, I think that in the last couple of years, with the explosion in this industry, some sponsored posts have, I think are getting like phoned in, and they're not, the content isn't as compelling. And so the performance bonuses for us in the short term, it's less about can we lower the initial offer price and offer a bonus to supplement that. That might be where the industry goes. I don't think we as a single brand have the power to do that, or it's time to do that. But instead we're saying, hey, there is a bonus here for the highest performers to hopefully incentivize them to put that extra effort into the content, to post bonus content, and to drive ultimately to drive value for our clients. Okay. Let's see, is there anything else here? Okay, I feel like I burned through a bunch of questions there. So I feel like we got through most of it. I appreciate everybody's time. This is again, it's a complex and incredibly important conversation. We completely understand the pressure that brands are under in, this kind of uncertain economic time. And our hope is that this is giving you some insight into things that you can do to increase the value of the dollars that you are spending, to capture more conversions, and hopefully reframe and think about how you think about those conversions and what influencer marketing's role is in the larger marketing stack here over the coming years. As always, we are around for any additional questions. If you just want to compliment me or Nell or Calvin, you can also do that. I am vain and sensitive, and I appreciate all the compliments that I can get. So feel free to just send me an email and say, James, you're really great. I appreciated that. You and your team are awesome. So anyway, it was so lovely to talk to y'all. And with that, I'm going to hit end on this thing. Thank you all so much.